I watch North Korean TV so that you don't have to. I decided that it might be interesting to just put English subs on a North Korean COVID PSA just to show a little different attitude towards the whole thing as opposed to the shit in the media here. Where it's all about how people are weary of wearing masks, and, you know, all this crap about how we have to learn to peacefully coexist with the virus and all this bullshit. The North Korean agitprop on COVID takes a slightly different attitude. And I have to say, things are so fucked that it's practically a breath of fresh air, despite the fact that I'm not a fan of how the place is run. Then if I were doing COVID agitprop, there are a lot of things I'd do differently, but there's a certain attitude to this that I can kind of appreciate, because it just starts out from three basic and totally, really undisputable premises. A, this shit is bad and we don't want it. B, if we don't want to get it, then we're gonna have to work together and everybody's got their own particular role to play in that. And C, this is going to have to be a priority, and we're going to have to fight like hell to make it happen. That it just acknowledges more of the reality of this situation than pretty much anything that I see in English language media. And we are at a very pretty pass. We are just seriously buggered when you get to the point where I can appreciate the realism of North Korean propaganda. So, without further ado...
여러분, 지금 세계적인 악성 전염병 사태는 더욱더 심각해지고 있습니다. 세계를 불안과 공포에 몰아넣고 인류를 항시적으로 위협하고 있는 이 악성 전염병 사태는 오늘날 전염력이 강한 새로운 변이 비루스들의 연이은 출현으로 해서 더욱더 파국적인 위기로 치닫고 있습니다. 모든 일꾼들과 근로자들은 오늘의 비상방역전에서는 바늘끝만한 틈도 순간의 해이도 절대로 용납될 수 없다는 것을 다시금 깊이 자각해야 합니다. 방역사업에서 전체 인민의 사상의지적 단합과 전 사회적인 자각적 일치성을 계속 유지하는 것이 무엇보다 중요합니다. 누구나 비상방역사업은 어제도 오늘도 변함없는 국가사업의 제1순위, 사소한 해이나 빈틈, 허점도 없이 강력하게 전개해 나가야 할 최중대사라는 것을 깊이 명심하고 국가적인 방역 조치들을 성실히 이행해 나가야 합니다. 국가가 정한 비상방역 규율은 곧 법이며 0.001%도 흥정할 권리가 없다는 관점을 가지고 각성하고 또 각성해서 무조건 준수하는 것을 체질화해야 합니다. 비상방역 상황의 장기화이자 국가 비상방역 사업에서의 최대의 각성, 강한 규율 준수 기풍에 장기합니다. 혁명의 지휘성원들인 일꾼들이 악성 비루스 전염병을 철저히 막기 위한 비상방역 사업을 강화하는 데서 그 누구보다 각성분발해야 합니다. 자기 지역과 단위의 방역 안전을 당과 국가 앞에 전적으로 담보하겠다는 비상한 각오를 안고 항상 의심하고 고민하면서 적실한 대책들을 앞질러 세워나가는 높은 책임성과 적극성, 애국적 헌신성이 올해의 총진군길에서도 계속 남김없이 발휘돼야 합니다. 인민의 안녕과 조국의 안전을 지키기 위한 비상방역전에서 방역부문 일꾼들의 역할이 대단히 중요합니다. 각급 비상방역기관과 방역부문의 일꾼들은 나라의 방역 기반을 과학적 토대 위에 확고히 올려세우고 방역부문의 물질기술적 토대를 튼튼히 갖춘 것을 비롯해서 우리의 방역을 선진적이며 인민적인 방역으로 이행시키는 데 필요한 수단과 역량을 보강 완비하는 사업을 적극 내밀어야 합니다. 비상방역 사업이 장기화될수록 우리가 철저히 경계해야 할 적은 안일과 해이, 방심과 방관입니다. 모든 부문 모든 단위에서 비상방역 사업과 관련한 상식과 방역 규정들을 깊이 인식시키기 위한 사업을 보다 짜고도로 진행하며 온 나라에 서로 통제하고 방조하는 대중적인 방역 분위기가 더욱 철저히 확립되도록 해야 합니다. 과학자 기술자들은 비상방역존에서도 기수 전초병이 돼야 한다는 비상한 각오를 안고 보다 새롭고 효율적인 방역수단과 방법들을 우리식으로 연구 도입하고 철저히 확립하도록 하기 위한 두뇌전 탐구전을 계속 힘있게 벌려야 합니다. 보건 일꾼들은 오늘의 비상방역전의 제1선을 지켜선 전초병으로서 그 누구보다 핵심적이고 주도적 역할을 해야 할 전위투사들입니다. 모든 보건 일꾼들은 해당 단위, 해당 지역의 비상방역 사업을 당과 국가 앞에 무조건 책임지겠다는 높은 각오, 인민의 생명과 건강은 자기들의 깨끗한 양심과 무한한 복무 정신으로 담보해야 한다는 자각을 새기고 방역 전선을 철통같이 강화하기 위한 투쟁에서 책임성과 헌신성을 남김없이 발휘해 나가야 합니다. 각지 검사 검역 부문 일꾼들은 오늘의 방역 대전의 최전선을 지켰었다는 높은 자각을 안고 초긴장 상태를 계속 견제하면서 검사 검역 규율과 질서를 더욱 강철같이 세워나가야 합니다. 날로 심각해지는 세계적인 보건 위기 상황은 우리 모두가 지난 1950년대와 천리마 시대 용들이 발휘한 불굴의 정신력으로 살며 투쟁해 나갈 것을 요구하고 있습니다. 비상방역 사업은 어제도 오늘도 변함없이 우리 앞에 나선 가장 선차적이며 중력적인 과업입니다. 모두 다 최대의 긴장성과 경각심을 견지하며 비상방역 사업을 계속 강도 높이 공세적으로 벌려나감으로써 조국보위, 인민보위의 최전선인 우리의 방역 진지를 더욱 철통같이 다져나갑시다.
It's a little bit different from the messaging you get here. The translation is clunky because Northern Korean is a bit clunky. I mean, not really. The thing is, Korean and Japanese, they have a sentence structure that is much more elastic. The North Korean love of adjective phrases can be much more easily accommodated. It is very difficult to put this into English because English sentences just aren't made to pile on adjective phrases like this. You lose the thread. This is part of why translations of Northern Korean are just clunky in general, because nothing is ever said matter-of-factly in official North Korean discourse. It's never just matter-of-fact. It's always they've got to throw in an adjective phrase to remind people of this and that and the other thing. And then actually it turns out there's another adjective phrase that needs to go in there. And finding a way to break this shit up to make English sentences that people can understand is just not easy. Another thing I should note, there's a term that is kind of complicated to translate, that gets used a lot in this. 비상방역. Now, if you look that up, you find emergency quarantine. I've translated it as infection control because what the measures they're describing aren't mostly things that fall under quarantine in the first place. So I say infection control, which is also kind of imprecise because we actually really don't know what's going on COVID-wise there. Clearly they're encouraging people to take it extremely seriously, but it's kind of murky beyond that. I mean, information on anything like this in North Korean media is never exactly granular. It's more like looking at a first-generation webcam on maximum zoom. You can get sort of the broad outlines of things, but that's about it. Because officially, in statements made for foreign consumption, they say they have 0 cases. That's not impossible, because even in normal times, foreign visitors are in something that you could call quarantine. and internal travel is rare and extremely restricted. So you could actually see that being possible. On the other hand, there have been from actual reliable sources indications that maybe there have been a few thousand suspected cases here and there, and that hasn't been followed up on. Because it's difficult to follow up on anything. It's not a place where you can just, send a few foreign journos around to ask some questions. It doesn't really work like that. But, so, that's kind of unclear, and then there was a special plenary meeting of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party in which Kim Jong-un gave people a bollocking over what the official English report of this from North Korean media called a grave incident related to COVID measures. But, of course, they didn't tell us what the incident was. They didn't tell us what its consequences were. And Kim Jong-un's speech was about the importance of not being incompetent. Which, I mean, that had to feel good to the people who were sitting there listening to be lectured on the importance of not sucking at your job. But, I mean, it doesn't really tell us much. I mean, and the only other real data point we've got is at the 8th Party Congress back in February, the health minister got replaced. No reason was given, because no reason ever is publicly, but it doesn't sound like that isn't something that necessarily suggests that this person was doing a satisfactory job. If they were, doing an excellent job, you'd probably want to hang on to them, but you can't tell. So, whether they are dealing with a pandemic that has actually reached inside the country or whether they're still keeping it out, it's kind of vague. And the only COVID statistics you actually get in North Korean media are what's happening in other countries. They never come right out and tell the general public that they have no cases, which is part of why you can't really be sure if they legit believe that they have no cases or whether that's just something they're telling the rest of the world. Just the attitude of that is just refreshing to me. Just the attitude that this is something, that this is a real problem and we've got to actually do some shit about it, rather than, but my profits. I mean, yeah, we could save a few 100,000 lives, but the Chamber of Commerce says that would cost them, I mean, their stock might go down 1/4 point, So we've got to look at this in a nuanced way. And really, what is a virus other than another life form? Shouldn't we be coexisting, like on Star Trek? There's somewhere in between that bullshit and a drill sergeant yelling at you to take this seriously. I think there is a good approach to messaging on this, and I'm there for it, honestly. I mean, as I watch this whole thing just fall apart, and the whole thing being presented as if it's no real problem, I kind of think maybe I might like to actually try my hand at making something. I mean, at least, signs for wheat pasting or something. And also, I just want to give my thanks to 강상원. I only know him on Twitter. He has his own YouTube channel, which I linked in the video. The Woron Language Institute. He helped me with the transcription. There were some bits where I just couldn't quite make out a word here and there, and just out of the blue, I just randomly asked him. I kind of put out a call just hoping that somebody might be willing to help out, and he's like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. I'll have a look at this. I tell him there's no hurry, and he has it for me within 15 minutes. I mean, so, 강상원씨, 정말 감사합니다.